Hello everyone and welcome to an MTG Top 10 here on the Aether Hub. I'm Nizzahon and I bring you guys limited content as well as top 10 lists like this one. This week, the top 10 list is a little bit of a tie-in with what Seiben is doing this week in his lore videos. He's talking about the angels and demons on the plane of Kaladesh, and this video is going to talk about the best 10 demons in all of Magic's history. To come up with this list, I look back in the archives of all the top 8 since competitive Magic began in the mid-90s, and come up with the 10 demons that have performed the best on this competitive scene. Let's talk now about how exactly I score these cards. So cards in this list receive points depending on how many Grand Prix or Pro Tour top 8s they have obtained, with a Pro Tour top 8 worth twice as much as a Grand Prix top 8. While they are not technically Pro Tours, I also include top 8s in the annual Vintage and Legacy Championships as Pro Tour top 8s because these are the highest level of competition for those formats, and in fact, Vintage doesn't get any Grand Prix or Pro Tours, so it gets completely left out if I stick strictly to this. Alongside each of the cards, you will see a breakdown of these points and other relevant information about the card, such as what formats it saw success in. Before we get started, let me know in the comments what you think will prove to be the number 1 card on the list, and we'll see if you're right. I have to say, I was a little surprised by number 1. Now let's get started with number 10. At number 10, we have Butcher of the Horde. Butcher of the Horde is a pretty strong card. It's a 4-mana 5/4 flyer, and that already is great, and the fact that for the cost of a creature, you can give it all sorts of relevant keyword abilities is also nice. It really only saw play in one deck though, and that was Mardu Midrange, a deck that also happened to run Hordeling Outburst and Goblin Rabblemaster, meaning there were often Goblin tokens around to sacrifice to the Butcher. The Butcher never saw play anywhere else, and it's unlikely that it ever will, as it is too slow and fragile for Modern. At number 9, with 7 points, we have another gold demon, Sire of Insanity. This is a pretty interesting card, as a 6-mana 6/4 who makes both players throw their hands in the graveyard every turn would not be great in just any format. However, Sire of Insanity was lucky enough to exist in a world that was completely loaded with control decks thanks to Sphinx's Revelation. Sire of Insanity provided a way for more mid-rangey decks to beat the control decks, because if a control deck has to lose their hand every turn, they're going to quickly lose the game to a 6/4. The Sire saw play in Return to Ravnica block, where it got its 1 Pro Tour top 8 in a 4-color mid-range deck, and because Sphinx's Revelation went on to success in the standard format of the time as well, Sire of Insanity put up some top 8s in Jund aggro decks, as well as predominantly Black Devotion aggro decks. The Sire has never seen play since it rotated, and it isn't a great candidate to do so, as 6 mana is way too much for the effect in Modern or any other non-rotating format. At number 8, we take a step really far back into Magic's past to Mirage. While the card here doesn't actually say Demon on it, the card has since been eroded to the creature type Demon Spirit. And Spirit of the Night may not look great today. 9 mana for a 6/5 and a ton of keyword abilities, as good as those abilities are, is way too much for today's game. Those abilities are pretty powerful though, including Haste, Flying, Trample, and Protection from Black, and First Strike when it attacks. However, in many ways, Spirit of the Night was the Akroma of his era. Before Eldrazi and Bristle Brand, Akroma was one of the best things you could cheat into play in Magic because of her litany of keyword abilities. And while Spirit of the Night is inferior in basically every way, in his time he was a creature that people tried to find a way to cheat into play because he could quickly end a game and he was the best at doing it. In the standard of his time, people cheated the Spirit into play with a card called Recurring Nightmare, and Spirit of the Night managed to pick up 4 top 8s at Worlds in 1998 in such a deck. He has since been outclassed by lots of other creatures, but there was definitely a moment where he was the best big creature to cheat into play in all of Magic. At number 7, we have a mythic demon from the current standard format, Mindwrack Demon. Delirium is a big deal in standard right now, and as a result, Mindwrack Demon is seeing some play. He's nice because he helps you get Delirium, while also providing a difficult to deal with threat. He was seeing a lot more play a few months ago before Ishkana Graph Widow was ever printed. Mindwrack Demon suffered from the printing of Ishkana for 2 different reasons. First, Ishkana can block him all day long thanks to her reach, and with Ishkana being one of the most played cards in standard right now, that's not really ideal. Additionally, Mindwrack Demon had to compete for slots with Ishkana herself because she's also a great card in the Delirium deck. As a result, he is seeing play at a lower rate right now, though in December 2 different black-green Delirium decks in Standard finished in the top 16 of Grand Prix Madrid running him, so he may not be completely done just yet. At number 6, we have another interesting card historically, Tombstalker, the very first creature with Delve. The Stalker was printed in Future Sight, a set that hinted at lots of futures for Magic, including hinting at a number of things that have actually since happened, including Planeswalkers and the Delve mechanic. As with its distant ancestor, Derma Angler, people quickly realized the value of being able to cast such a large, and in the Stalker's case, evasive, creature for so little mana. Any deck that could quickly fill its graveyard with either cheap spells or the Dredge mechanic was interested in playing Tombstalker for a while, as he became one of the most efficient creatures there were at the time. Tombstalker saw fairly regular play in Legacy until the printing of Derma Angler, and he went missing for a while. But he actually managed to show up in a Grixis Delver deck that top-8'd the most recent Legacy Grand Prix in January of 2017, so maybe he is on the rise. At number 5, we have Herald of Torment, the only enchantment on the list, as you might imagine. When it was in Standard, Herald of Torment was a very strong 3-drop because it provided 3 power and 3 toughness in the air, which is enough to compete with Mantis Rider when it was around in Standard. Additionally, the fact that it actually was an enchantment was relevant because it saw play in Constellation decks, and Constellation was a mechanic that cared about enchantments. Where he saw the most play, though, was in the Abzan decks that dominated Standard for a very long time. The one knock against Abzan was that it couldn't play Mantis Rider, but Herald of Torment gave them something comparable, and something that had the upside of also being able to, in the late game, be used as an aura to give your Siege Rhino or something flying, and this then meant if the opponent used removal, you would still have your Herald of Torment in play. At number 4, we have a card that surprised me a bit because honestly, I didn't remember that it was a demon, Rakshasa Death Dealer. The Death Dealer is another card that rode the Abzan train to all of its victories, never really appearing in any other decks. It was a solid 2-drop for the deck with the ability to either pump itself or regenerate, or both if you have enough mana. Honestly though, it isn't all that powerful of a card, and it likely wouldn't have seen so much play if other cards in the Abzan deck like Siege Rhino, Wingmate Rock, and Abzan Charm weren't so good. In fact, I'm not even sure it is the best 2-drop in the Abzan decks at the time, as I think I actually like Fleece Mane Lion a little bit more. Still though, Grand Prix and Pro Tour top 8s still mean the card was a successful one. At number 3, we have the Demon, who, if this list was based purely upon raw power, would probably be number 1, and that is Bristle Brand. We talked about Spirit of the Night and Akroma earlier, and how they were, at one time, the best things you could cheat into play. Well, Bristle Brand is now one of the contenders for that title, if not the winner. Bristle Brand is ridiculous, giving you the ability to draw cards for life when he himself has lifelink, meaning it isn't impossible to draw 7 cards a turn with him in play without any real cost. That's an easy way to win a game, plus the 7 damage he does every turn. However, despite all this power, Bristle Brand doesn't quite make it to the top of this list because he can really only be played in one type of deck, a deck that cheats him into play. This includes Reanimator strategies, or decks that have other ways of cheating him into play. Because of that, and because the decks he has been in have never been the all-out most dominant deck of any format, Bristle Brand is held to 26 points. That said, he does continue to see play, and will add to his resume as time goes on. He has been played in every format possible, and not only played, but picked up a top 8 in every format possible, indicating just how powerful Bristle Brand is in a vacuum. If Vintage and Legacy players are still interested in cheating this demon into play with a much larger card pool, you know he's pretty bonkers. Some popular ways to do it include a typical reanimation strategy, as well as cards like Sneak Attack and Oath of Druids. He actually even picked up 2 more Grand Prix top 8s at the most recent Grand Prix that was Legacy, one in a Sneak and Show deck and one in an Animator deck. However, for all of Bristle Brand's successes and power, he hasn't gotten the most Pro Tour and Grand Prix top 8s of a demon in Magic's history. 2 more have at least doubled his score. The first of these is Desecration Demon, who's at number 2. Desecration Demon was one of the best creatures in Standard when it was in the format. The card has a really interesting design in that usually if you get a 4-mana 6/6, it is going to come with some downside, and don't get me wrong, it does. The demon can be tapped down if your opponent is willing to sacrifice a creature, but that's not the worst downside. First of all, you are affecting your opponent's board, and second of all, the demon actually gets bigger. Eventually, the demon's appetite for your opponent's creatures will put your opponent in a bad place, and they will be forced to take a few attacks from this large evasive creature. The demon is definitely a bit of a metagame dependent card, because if a format was heavy with creature tokens, the demon would be pretty bad, but he didn't really have to worry about that. Because he was so good when he was in Standard, he saw play in most decks playing black at the time. This included control decks like Golgari and Orzhov, but also included more aggressive decks like Mono Black Devotion, Golgari Aggro, and so on. He did see the most success in Mono Black Devotion though, picking up more than half of his points in those decks. But Desecration Demon doesn't quite have enough points to make number 1 on the list, being narrowly beaten out by a card that is a little bit of a sneaky demon, and that is Westvale Abbey. I thought for a while about whether or not the Abbey, who transforms into a demon, Ormondal, Profane Prince, deserved to be on this list given the fact that it isn't always a demon, but in the end I thought it should be included because the very real threat of an opponent flipping the Abbey into a demon, Ormondal, is something that is game-breaking, and many games have been lost to the powerful demon, who is not only evasive with flying and indestructible, but can also attack right away and has lifelink. Westvale Abbey is seeing play right now in multiple decks across both Standard and Modern, and is basically a wise inclusion in any deck that does a good job flooding the board with creatures. In Standard, this has included green-white tokens, white weenie decks, black-green Cryptolith decks, collected company decks, and so on. In Modern, this has included Bant, Company, and Elves. It is unlikely that Ormondal slows down much, as he is still seeing play in Standard now and will for a while, and because as a land, I think he has a great chance of fitting into other formats very easily. So that does it for this week's top 10 list. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you have any questions about the list or demons you think should have made the list, post them in the comments below. And if you want to make sure you catch future top 10s as well as a bunch of other great content from other Magic the Gathering content creators, don't forget to subscribe here to the Aether Hub. And if you want to see more top 10s of mine, you can find more of them over at my own channel called NizzahonMagic. Thanks for watching.